do that while we're doing this session.
Sounds good. Okay. And I believe we're going to have a couple of additional panelists joining us at any point, but we'll go ahead and get started. So as you can tell from the title of our session, essentially this isn't around sustainability as in eco-sustainability, which we were talking a lot about 7 months ago, but not so much these days. Now we're talking about IT sustainability and putting things into place that are going to last through any public health incidents that we have in our counties and within state and local government, supporting citizens, and posturing now for the future, because now we've sort of seen what being prepared can do for organizations. So we're certainly facing unprecedented challenges as we all navigate the changes COVID-19 has placed on our organizations. We're each dealing with significant disruptions and the need to securely provide services to residents and employees while dealing with our organization's transformation to a remote and distributed workforce. So those are some of the things we're going to be focusing on today. Of course, that's coupled with financial insecurity and ongoing operating challenges. So this may all start to sound rather dire. However, this discussion that we're going to have today is going to cover both the challenges and the successes of the CIOs we have on the call today, and that they've had over the past 7 months or so, and what they did in preparation in advance of these unprecedented events. So we'll also discuss best practices that were in place, which helped each of them be ready for this resiliency, as well as the questions that they each still have, which we plan to address as a group. So please keep that chat going with any questions or comments or discussion points that you have, pain points that you also have. We're encouraging you to submit those questions and share those best practices in the chat, and we'll get to as many of those as possible toward the last 15 minutes of our time here. So we see one of our speakers has joined us in the chat. I think he needs to head to the backstage, so we'll let him work on that through, he would have a separate link for that. So I will start by introducing all of our panelists, and hopefully they'll all have joined us toward the end. So we have with us Chris Cruz, who's the Chief Information Officer for San Joaquin County and the former Deputy CIO for the state of California. His organization is a federated model, and I'm just bringing these up because I think sometimes this is an interesting connection point that some of the folks who are joining our session may have. They're moving toward a slightly more centralized model within San Joaquin County. In San Joaquin, they have currently an alternative work schedule, so some days on-site, some off-site, teleworking with VPN. And so I'll kick it over to Chris so he can share a fun fact. I like to sort of humanize panelists by having them share what their first job is, and I actually know what Chris's first job was. So why don't you share that with the group, Chris?
Well, thank you, Rebecca, and it's great to be a part of the organization. Again, thanks, John, and for being a part of the CISDA conference. And as we say, thinking outside the box in terms of making a virtual conference this year. So you're right, Rebecca, you do know what my first job was, and it was at McDonald's when I was 16 years old in Folsom, California. So I haven't veered much from my first demographic job location. In fact, I live about 5 miles from that McDonald's. So,
oh, that's great.
I'd say I don't get around too much.
Great, kind of standard corporate lessons that you learned there, right? So yeah, that's great.
Flipping Big Macs and flipping French fries.
Yes, it's fantastic. So it hasn't changed too much. We also have on the line, and he was speaking earlier, Jan, who anyone in their right mind does not attempt to pronounce his last name. They always kick it over to him to let him do it himself.
Come on.
Jan is with Napa County, and he's the current president of CISDA. So thank you for hosting the conference for us today. In Napa County, they have a centralized model, and in addition to the COVID-19 pandemic, they were also facing their annual wildfire season and the additional challenges that brings to the county of Napa. They've also had earthquakes in the past, and so some of these other natural disasters play into their resiliency strategy. And Jan, why don't you share with us your first job?
Okay, well, I wasn't as glamorous as working at McDonald's, but thank you, Rebecca. So my first kind of real paying job was when I was fairly young, and that was working at a construction company. and nothing glamorous, being a finished carpenter or anything like that. But it was, start out being a laborer, which basically, picking up stuff, garbage and whatever else off the construction grounds. Also helping with anybody that needed help, carrying stuff off of a forklift or anything like that. So that was always interesting. The one thing that I appreciate having this job early on, and I did do that for a little while I was growing up, but it made me appreciate wanting to go to college, wanting to continue with college. When there was those rough times, when I came back to work in the summer during those rough times and during the semesters in college, it just, coming back to that, construction, it just made me appreciate, being able to, being fortunate enough to be able to go to college and, find a job in the computer science sector.
Great, thank you. Yeah, definitely lessons to be learned from all of those first jobs that we've had. My first job was working as it's called a fountain girl. I don't know if that's PC anymore, but at Friendly's restaurant making ice cream. So that's what we called ourselves. So, and I think we have Tim on the line now. Tim, are you able to hear us clearly? We can see that you've joined.
Yeah, I don't see him or hear him.
Okay. All right. We'll keep an eye out for those folks. I saw him pop in for a second. So to get us started in our discussion, why don't you each share, and why don't we start with Chris, how COVID-19 has impacted your organization and your citizen engagement? So are you seeing rapid implementation of tools or practices that have been positive? And what do you expect of those will continue to be long-term and really stick? So we'll start with Chris.
Well, thanks, Rebecca. I think, coming into San Joaquin County as a CIO in April of 2019, I kind of hit the ground running. And, one of the things we really looked at was a preparation plan and looking at our security across the county. As you mentioned earlier, San Joaquin County is a federated model for technology. But I looked at more of how do we roll out enterprise capabilities and tools and standardize our infrastructure across the county with a common security posture. So we really looked at putting a cybersecurity assessment in place first, and then we followed that on with a 3-year cyber strategy that San Joaquin County has that really is an evolution of how we're doing business today. And the reason I wanted to put that in, I'm a strong believer in what gets measured gets managed. And if you can manage from a governance perspective and have a roadmap for success, you'll be better off in making the necessary business case to the department heads, the sheriff, the district attorney, and basically all of the executives involved here in the county, as well as the chief executive officer, to make the right business case. So we were able to succeed and do that. And part of that deployment included kind of grade A Department of Defense tools like CrowdStrike and Tanium, together with our Palo Alto network and Cisco StealthWatch to really formulate an endpoint protection monitor across the county. So we started this evolution actually before the pandemic hit. I think it was just great planning, or actually luck, probably by chance, but we were well prepared, I think, to transition into the hybrid work model that we have today. And I think having those tools, we have endpoint protection and encryption across 7,400 endpoints in the county, but we're following a strategy and we're following a plan that everybody, even in our federated organizations, has bought into. So it's made us more successful in terms of preparing for COVID-19 and ensuring now that this hybrid working model is successful. And that also included some utilization of our network and how we looked at network bandwidth across the organization, how we utilized that to ensure that we had capability here for those that remain in the building versus those 5,000 employees that went home. And having endpoint protection across the VPN capability has made us more successful in our work. And as I mentioned earlier, we have case managers in our organization, and those case managers are serving their constituents via virtual models moving forward. And I think with these technologies and tool capabilities in place, we're effectuating the right kinds of changes here in San Joaquin County, and we're better prepared to manage risk both short-term and long-term. So in the long term, we've created a telework policy. As mentioned, the county has telework offered 2 days a week with an alternative work schedule. So some folks are out 3, but what we really wanted to do is ensure that we had parity within our organization and necessary staff to support our services here in the building, but also to ensure that our staff were safe and had the necessary safeguards in place to deploy the right mechanisms. And so I think we've been very successful with this model. We plan to continue this model beyond COVID-19, and the security-based tools that we have in place, I think, have managed our risk, mitigated things appropriately, and allowed our workers to do their job anywhere, anytime, any place. And it's effective resolution. And it's also helped us, quite frankly, with succession and workforce planning here in the county to be able to attract and retain people remotely, which really increases our efficiencies in how we deliver services to the constituent. So all in all, it's been very successful moving forward. I never say, never let a good crisis go undone. And we were able to take advantage of that crisis and develop the preventative-based mechanisms to ensure that the county had success in delivering services.
Thank you, Chris. And we like to keep you in suspense here. So we have now welcomed our other panelists, and I'll go ahead and introduce them for you, and we can carry on with the conversation. So Tim Dupree is the Chief Information Officer and dual role Registrar of Voters with Alameda County. Thank you for all the work you're doing and making sure that we have access to vote. And he's the immediate past president of CISDA. His county operates in a federal model. He does have that dual role. And Tim will do a mic test by letting you share what your first job was.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay, great. I think I heard somebody said McDonald's was their first job. Well, here, a fellow McDonald's alumni. I also started my first job at McDonald's down in Southern California.
One of the original McDonald's.
That's it.
All right.
Character
And then
building job, right? Builds character.
It certainly does.
Food service will do that for you, for sure. And Tim, it sounds like Tim may have been from Southern California. We have someone joining us from Southern California today, and that's Joel Golub, who's the Chief Information Officer for the County of Orange. His county operates in a hybrid federated model. They recently went from the 100% on-site, full-time, on-prem workforce to 85% off-site. So obviously, as you can imagine, some of those critical roles still needing to report. And why don't you share with us, Joel, your first job?
Oh, hi all. Can you hear me okay?
Can you hear just fine?
Great. I love it when technology comes together. I started out in 1977 as a COBOL and Fortran programmer as an intern in college at a large utility. And I guess the most memorable was that I worked on one of the first solar projects in the country to help the engineers analyze the data and understand the test. And I have to say, I want to comment on the least favorable, because a couple of years after that, I had a job offer to go to Microsoft, and I looked at them as sort of a fly-by-night, and I thought mainframes were going to be the future. So I turned that down, but that was probably the least favorable decision I made.
Well, I mean, just a little startup operating out of a garage. How could you ever know?
Right.
Well, there you go. And I hear the state of New Jersey is needing some help with COBOL on their unemployment insurance system. So if you ever need a retirement plan, there you go. So thank you all for being here. We've got the whole team together, and Chris just shared with us some of the transformations and posturing that he had in place. I'll also ask that same question over to Jan. What has your organization done in terms of rapid implementation of tools and practices, and which of those do you expect will be long-term, and if not long-term, what do you need to do to them to be long-term?
Sure. Thank you, Rebecca. But first, I just want to say, hey, Joel, Orange County, orange shirt, love it. So, for us, kind of in addition to what Chris was talking about, what we were looking at is a workforce that, right away had to do telework. And so, the challenge for us was, getting the equipment that was needed, laptops, cameras, things like that. And so even before, people started going home, we did put in orders, kind of thinking this is the way it's going to go. And so we did some early orders to get something going, but, it still was a challenge to get the equipment. So what we did is, in addition to our normal processing channel or purchasing channels, we also just looked locally too to get equipment that would fit what we needed for laptop configurations and whatnot. And so we kind of did it that way as well. The other thing that was a challenge of, in citizen engagement, you bring that up, we had to find a way for, to allow, the residents to attend public meetings, such as the Board of Supervisors meetings, the Planning Commission meetings. And so, we had to scramble to do that as well, meaning, we have a board chambers that has all the video, sound equipment, AV equipment in there. But it was really, how do we get that to be a two-way, not only show it, but also allow for public comment remotely. So, we had to look for technologies that way. And, we weren't using those technologies at that point. So we had to kind of really ramp up and get that going. So, we were able to do that. There was, a lot of stumbling initially, and, it wasn't very smooth, but, we've got down to a point where, that's a pretty smooth process now. And, when this is over, we will continue probably allowing to do that, for public comment remotely, whether it's through video chat or, electronically through another system that we're going to be implementing here pretty soon. So, we look forward to that. On top of COVID, the other challenges that we had was, we had two major fires back to back, one in August, started in August, and another in September. And, the one hadn't been fully contained before the other one started. And with that, we had to really ramp up, emergency operations center operations. And so, that meant call centers to where our residents could call in for assistance. As we, get to the end of the disasters, we have the recovery operations. And so we deal with, the, local assistance centers. And, we looked at making that virtual. Luckily, we had, a website in place already from past fires that we could utilize. But, inevitably, it always comes back to there needs to be some type of interaction with the residents to us. And so what we've done is, look at other technologies, to continue with that, internally to kind of help each other out. We're going to look at rolling out Teams more in a phased approach while we ramp that up pretty quickly. And, that's something that's worked out really great. We'll keep, obviously. And people are really taking advantage of the Teams and Teams channels today. We also implemented to allow for, not having to go too much in the office. We looked at digital signatures. So we adopted a digital e-signature policy pretty quickly, got that up and running. And we're now working with a vendor to get that going. So we have that happening to where, board members can do signatures remotely, clerk of the board members, district attorney's office on certain things. So, and we'll expand that out. So that's one thing that will stay as well. And as far as, people coming into the office, it's, setting up or helping set up sites for whatever it might be, with the fires. It's doing what we can electronically, but inevitably, we have residents that have to come in and, in person and get information. So we had to set up for that in conference rooms that we had to convert over to kind of these special areas that they can go to, with the social distancing, and then having the technology to kind of support the workers and the residents. So, those are some of the things that we have done, and some that are long.
Just a few. Yeah. Been a busy 7 months. Well, I think you bring up some really great points of some of the technologies that you've implemented. There are things that are operationally, they're enhancing the work that you do and the engagement of citizens. So, not just simply on engagement, but of course, there's also a piece around accessibility and allowing more people to interact with the government. So I think it's great that you bring up those points. Around engagement, I know that a lot of people were initially challenged with changing policies and or flexing policies is probably a better way to put that, right? So in order to engage people in meetings, while still adhering to the Brown Act and some other regulations, it was necessary to sort of evolve things as you were going. So, it may have been that first you only had people able to listen in, and then maybe it was next meeting they were able to comment more than just writing in, actually having voice. So it's interesting to see a lot of these evolutions of the processes and also some policies as well. So I am going to attempt to launch a poll before our next question, so please wish me luck. The poll is, my organization has been more challenged with either overcoming policy and regulations or budget constraints. So I'll ask all of our attendees to respond to that. And then I'll ask that question over to Tim as people are responding to that poll. You only get one option to answer that poll. But Tim, what are the bigger challenges that you've faced in rapidly implementing these technology solutions to specifically address COVID-19? Is it the security of distributed workforce, budget, leadership support, these policies that were in place? And why don't you go ahead and get started, and I'll tell you that we are leaning heavily to one, and maybe
I see that.
See if you see it. Yeah.
So I'm going to say I probably would vote for policies. So I'd be one. It looks like I'd be in the minority on the poll, but as you said, a number of policies or even legislation went in place to allow us to have virtual meetings right away. So that was good. But I think there needs to be more. Some of the policy changes and regulation changes allowed us to do things like put on virtual weddings. I mean, who'd ever heard of having a wedding virtually? And we were one of the first counties to be able to hold virtual weddings and issue the wedding certificate electronically. We're now up over 1,000 virtual weddings, by the way, and we have a waiting list. So as I take a look to the future, I'm wondering if that's going to stay. Are those policies and regulations that we're lightened up right now going to allow us to continue to offer services in these really unique ways? Are we going to be?
I hope that you don't have to be issuing virtual divorces soon, at the very least.
But on the other hand, putting my registrar hat on, COVID hit right around the time that we were starting to put the November election together, and regulations around a wedding signature for our candidates that we had to bring in and bring on the ballot. That didn't lighten up. So we didn't really, we brought in around 300 candidates locally on our ballot, but we didn't want 300 candidates coming into our office during that very short window of time. So we did have a way to coach them through the process of getting their paperwork into us, but ultimately some had to come in to sign a wedding signature. So I think as we're looking at policies and regulations, I mean, those are things that maybe it's time to really move towards electronic signature, seeing legislation that allows us for something as simple as a candidate signing their paperwork to come on the ballot. Why does that have to be in person with a wedding signature? Why can't that be digital? So I think this event is really pressing us to be innovative in the way that we deliver our services, but it's also showing us where we still have some more room to grow with our policies and regulations.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's whereas folks within IT, I think for a while, hopefully, at least have been asking the question, why? Why are we doing things this way? But it wasn't until somewhat recently that broader organizations have been driven to ask that question, why and how we can do things a bit differently. So, Joel, I'll ask the same question over to you. What are the biggest challenges that you faced in your organization? You're structured a little bit differently in Orange County. Is it security, the workforce, budget, leadership support, those policies? What have been some of the pain points holding you back, or things that have been helping you drive things forward?
Yeah, I mean, our experience is very similar to the stories we've heard before. But I want to focus on something that came up in our CIO lounge yesterday. And Dan from Santa Clara said it. And I love this expression. He asked the question, who is responsible for innovation in your organization? And the answer was COVID.
Oh.
And so, I want to focus on the positive sides of COVID, not diminishing the horror of the disease, but I think COVID has created opportunity for IT. In our case, It forced us on the path to cloud. We engaged our partners and Microsoft and one of their partners to help us move faster. It kickstarted our O365 campaign. It highlighted the importance of DRP and business continuity. I think it's given new meaning to IT, trying to explain to clients why we need to focus on backup and the what ifs that occur. You won't get that deer looking into the headlights of a car look from the clients when you go down that path. It stress tested our infrastructure. So we know we can move call centers off premise. We know we have tools that we use every day for sporadic evening support, but we know we can use it en masse 24/7. We know that collaboration platforms can scale to hundreds, if not thousands per day. And it's forced us to rethink our end devices to be prepared for other disasters going forward. We've used COVID, we've challenged our citizen engagement platforms, and again, demonstrating how moving citizens away from walk-up windows to online and web and mobile has huge benefits during an event like this. We had implemented a popular CRM that we use in our public works department about a year and a half earlier, and that department ran smoothly with all their engagements with their customers. So it verified the decision that was made a while ago that is the right decision, and we need to move that forward. And I think the other thing that stands out to me is it reminded us that working as a team, we can accomplish just about anything. I heard these stories from every county, and there is so much value in nurturing the partnerships with our vendors. We use a vendor for a managed service partner, and I didn't get the question change order once. I got the question, how can we help you? How fast can we make it happen? And so I think the big positive change for us or continuance for us is that it has verified that IT should have a seat at the table. We can create efficiencies, we can support the business, and in our case, we can fight the impact of revenue loss due to COVID. And I think all these opportunities will stand moving forward. None of it's going away. We'll be better prepared and stronger for the next, hopefully not the next time, but we know there'll be something. And when that happens, I think we'll be better prepared.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely been a number of opportunities that have come out of the recent events. It's certainly been an opportunity for technology to shine. It's also, I think, in a small note, allowed people to be a little more sympathetic to what it takes to successfully implement technologies, because everyone is now a technologist. Everyone is doing something, or certainly more than they did before, using technology, whether it's joining a webinar, leading a meeting, and to understand what that takes is making people a little more sympathetic and understanding and working together as a team to achieve those goals. So that's been great. I do want to talk a little bit more about budget, because certainly budget is showing up as a bigger challenge for the folks who are at least on this call today, overcoming those budget constraints. So I'm going to lead us into a next poll and our next question. So the poll is, my county has used CARES Act funding for technology to support. You can choose a few here. I'll go ahead and launch that poll. I'm just announcing that to give people who are just listening and not watching the opportunity to jump in on that. And I'll go ahead and ask, so counties are unique in this position that they can use CARES Act funding. So how have each of you used CARES Act funding? And based on your experience, what advice can you give to our attendees to navigate that new process, which has some pretty serious deadlines attached to it? So it's one that you can't sort of sit still on. So Chris, did you want to talk a little bit about how you're jumping into the CARES Act pool?
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. I think it's very timely. We've been able to leverage CARES Act funding for obviously distributing and changing our PC refresh cycle from desktops to laptops. We've been able to add additional gear and equipment for folks that are working remotely in those particular perspectives. We've been able to look at our security tools and underlying infrastructure foundation to ensure that one-time costs of purchasing are covered within the dollars that we've expended. So all in all, I think the necessary outreach and putting the technology infrastructure and security together has greatly benefited us with the basically the CARES funding. But other than that, we're also using HABA money. Like Tim, I also have management responsibility for the Register of Voters. So I brought them into the security fold as well to ensure that we have a common standard approach to how we manage securities in elections. We put a brand new security voter system in. We put a implementation of a poll pad system in using HABA money. And then last but not least, Homeland Security dollars that we all get from the Department of basically Office of Emergency Services in the state of California. We're using dollars there to drive our cybersecurity prowess, help fund our strategy and future, assessments of the military to make sure that we're doing the right things from a people, process, and technological change capability. So all in all, I think we're leveraging dollars that are in grants to be able to fund these mechanisms because we couldn't fund it out of our regular budget. But with the additional grant money, I think we can set up today with an eye on tomorrow and then cost allocate those services back to our programs and department heads to be able to pay for those. But more and more what's setting up is enterprise capabilities and driving enterprise solutions throughout the county. I know I mentioned earlier, getting the district attorney on board, getting the sheriff's office on board. We have a single email system. We have a single security posture in the county. We now have a standardized infrastructure in the county. So addressing things inside the house and providing the necessary training was important, but all of this was predicated on getting those funding dollars from those particular grants that I'd identified. And there's more to come with that. These grants are yearly, and not only am I responsible for information technology in the county, but also for managing these grants through Homeland Security and OES. So it helps when we're the grant organizer, if you will, to be able to have those discussions and sit down with our department heads. But I thought Joel said it best as, I have a seat at the table with the executives here in this county, the chief executive officer, and they rely more and more on the chief information officer, whether I'm the CIO, the chief digital officer, the chief change officer, or transformation officer. I'm playing all those roles now in the county, and the department heads are relying on myself and my organization to make those reflective changes and model the way. So it's going to be more important that we continue to feed and nurture the money that's there. And I would definitely implore all my other county peers to look at those dollars as one-time dollars that hopefully will lead to a sustainable funding stream moving forward. Because if we can do this and we can partner, I think we can have the right kinds of tools and succession for all 58 counties. So those that don't have plentiful budget can take advantage and value out of these tools and protecting our ecosystem, protecting our most important and mission critical data, and obviously protecting our constituents and employees. So that being said, I think it's a great responsibility, but it's a great opportunity to drive transformation and innovation in our counties moving forward and leveraging those dollars and making the right business case. So I've allocated additional resources in IT just to manage grant funding, because I know how important it is for us to innovate and transform the way that we do business in our organization.
Thank you, Chris. And then I'll ask the same question over to Jan. I think you're dealing with some transformations of equipment and hardware, and some questions around how to potentially use some of that CARES Act funding. So why don't you share with us?
Sure, Rebecca, thanks. So, like any county, we were allocated some money, and our county executive office, what they did is said, okay, so how are we going to allocate this out to the different departments? It's just not IT that needs money. Health and Human Services, law enforcement, helping out the public too, in doing what we do with them. So it was more of, here, Jan, it wasn't more of here, Jan, here's a chunk of money for you. So it's so Jan, how much money do you need, and you need to justify what you need to do. So and this is kind of a lessons learned that we had, and probably some advice for other counties is when we're going through disasters, we document what we buy, the hours that we work on disasters, and we have special coding for that. So we track that, and it's all about documentation, and more documentation is making sure that you've documented, dotted the I's, crossed the T's. And so we've learned from that when we're, submitting for FEMA reimbursement or state reimbursement, there's documentation that we have to provide. And they'll come in and sit down with us and go over that documentation and grill us around that. So the better the documentation you have, the easier it is to kind of justify what you do. So, I mean, we approach this in the same way as well. You know, we when we went out and bought equipment like laptops or whatever else that was needed for the teleworkers or for anybody that you know supporting operations in remote locations, we documented all the purchases that we did that were related to COVID. You know, here's equipment that we bought specifically for this incident, and with that, we were able to say, you know, this is how much we need, and here's the evidence of what we purchased of as documentation. And so with that, we were able to get money that we spent, and you know, getting reimbursed for that. So I think you know, again, the lesson there is just making sure you document everything. You know, we at the same time we were purchasing for the COVID, we were also purchasing for you know, regular operations. You know, something that Chris mentioned earlier. So you know, we really have to keep those two purchases separate, and even the equipment that we dole out, you know, we have to keep that separate as well, so that if there's any audit that happens in the future, yeah, we can say, yeah, this money was used for COVID, and here's where that piece of equipment went.
And you certainly must have also been leveraging some of those strong vendor relationships if you were even able to get any laptops at that time, because they were about as scarce as toilet paper and hand sanitizer wipes. So another great example of how working with existing relationships has really helped. But I think the documentation is a key piece. And I'm sure we have some folks who are listening to our session today who could benefit from sharing some of those documents. I don't want to speak too much on behalf of the panelists we have here today, but I think that's a key resource within CISDA, is to be able to reach out to this network, not have to recreate the wheel, right? We have folks who've put that, not pen to paper, but digital pen to paper, to make those justifications for technology. And a lot of that same argument or you know, can be leveraged to make the same request for your own county. So certainly reach out to folks to see what they're doing and see if you can leverage that documentation. So now we'll shift a little bit over to the workforce, and I want to remind folks there were a few questions about how they can ask questions. Unfortunately, we don't have live audio set up for our participants today, but if you do have questions for our panelists, please put those in either the chat or the Q&A. I'm taking a look at both, but the chat is fine, and I will make sure to get those asked of our panelists. They can also see the questions as they're coming in. So now, talking about the workforce, let's shift over to talk about this new and distributed workforce in government, something that's really sort of new to government, but not necessarily new in other industries, but new to everyone, I think, at the scale that we're operating at. And how this is going to shape sort of the future of government and how government will work. So if I'll ask of Tim, how have you worked to use policies that were already in place to sort of flex those policies, gain support, and also the always difficult conversation to have, how did you work in labor negotiations to make some of these things possible?
Right. So we were in a position where we had just finished our telework policy, and we had to write a telework policy, and it was one that said if you were at certain performance levels, you qualified for working remotely. It said we would allow 1 day a week. We were just sticking our toe in the water. It had to go through labor. We had to let them know that we were considering it, and it was reviewed. Our HR department reviewed the policy, and then COVID hit. So the policy was adopted in, I believe it was January, and we had just started implementing it, and COVID hit, and so we quickly actually modified the policy to say that, you know, in special circumstances, the CIO may have people work remotely. It may change the policy. So, and again, that had to eventually go through labor and get adopted. So we did have that all in place. So and it worked. It's about a 2-page document. We've shared it with other departments, and they've adapted it to their department. we have some departments like our social services agency, which has a lot of frontline workers. They're there, and that really becomes a very different beast. So in the case of IT, we have a lot of people who are not frontline workers. They're developing, they're able to take that work off-site, remote. But then there are those people who are providing service really at the street level. People are coming into offices, and in many cases we were able to allow some of that to be virtual, but some of it just can't be done. So a department like our social services agency, which is serving as a safety net for people going through some of the hardest times in the county, maybe that wasn't as easy for them. So right now they're still grappling with how does this look, which workers is it appropriate for. But as we're working through this, and this pandemic continues, and our healthcare director is telling us that it may take us into 2022 that we're still working in this fashion. I think those policies, working through that, the pressure that we're feeling from this situation to work through those is going to shape what our new reality for work is, even beyond the pandemic. So I really see us having a hybrid of this even after this is all over. We will still always have those workers who have to be here, but some sort of hybrid is probably going to exist, and these policies, as we write them, I think we have to keep an eye towards that. It's not just a one and done for this situation. It's something that we're going to have in place, and as we talk to labor, we need to keep that in mind, is that we're going to have some sort of work remote for the foreseeable future, and maybe always. And we have to figure out where it's appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'll ask Chris, you had shared something just the other day. Tim was saying that they were just dipping their toe into remote work. I know in San Joaquin, you're just starting to dip your toe into hiring outside of the region. Another one of these things is, as Joel was saying earlier, there's opportunities that are coming out of this, right? So we are now seeing some folks interested in moving out of the region if this is to be a very long-term thing in terms of working remote. Chris, in San Joaquin, you're, like I said, just dipping your toe into the possibility of filling some of that skill set gap that we may face because of either the location of the county that we're in or just difficult roles to fill. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I thought, Tim Dupuy made some great comments about really outreach and what to do. And obviously, Tim, one of the things we want to do with outreach and recruiting and telework is attract more people from Alameda County, given that you guys border us. So,
getting competitive.
It's kidding. But I think in the bigger picture, there's a couple people when you come into the county that you want to partner with, and one is the director of HR, Human Resources, and one is the chief financial officer. Because you have to be able to fund your initiatives and get HR to cooperate with what you do if you want to achieve your performance goals and look at recruitment and retention moving forward. So those are two partnerships that I hold dear to my heart here, as opposed to my previous job as well. So you learn quickly. But I think one of the areas that we're really looking at is really how do we attract and retain staff, and how do we do the applicable outreach. In San Joaquin County, we have maybe 115 to 120 IT folks, and they're distributed throughout the Stockton area. But how do we attract people from the state of California? We're 48 miles away from downtown Sacramento. How do we bring people to a level of interest to want to come work with San Joaquin County? And obviously, San Joaquin County is located in Stockton, and there's collateral benefits to that and also detriments, just to be transparent. But if we can offer a flexible work schedule and we can attract the brightest folks in security and networking and innovation and transformation, then we can get them to come to San Joaquin County and we can leverage their expertise. Because at the end of the day, that's going to make our organization more efficient and effective in how we meet our constituent needs. And I think just one of the other areas that we've been working on right now is we have a hospital, a major trauma center here in the Central Valley, San Joaquin General Hospital. And so one of the areas that we've attempted to recruit in is public health informatics people. And hospital people are very hard to recruit and retain. So we just hired our first from public health informatics from Atlanta, Georgia. And he is now in the organization working full-time as a telework person. But we're already seeing the value in terms of what the data and the queries he's doing for COVID-19 and the information, the data exchange he's doing not only with the federal CDC, but the state of California and their electronic laboratory reporting. So it pays dividends if you're attracting the right kind of people that have very complex and unique skill sets that you want to leverage. And I think this is a great opportunity to be able to do that with an infrastructure that's secure, that having VPN, having private network, with Microsoft Teams, with multi-factor authentication, with mobile device management. So we're securing people at the endpoint levels that I think mitigate the risk to the county and allow us to take what I say, some mitigated risks moving forward and hiring people and looking at where the county wants to be moving forward. And the more that you can attract and retain these types of folks with skill sets, you're going to have success long term. And my goal here is really to bring sustainability and continuity to the county to ensure that we can meet the necessary needs of our workforce moving forward, but really drive a long-term innovation and transformation strategy for success. And it's about a partnership. It's more than just about Chris Cruz. It's about everyone in ISD, all of my department heads and peers working together collaboratively to better benefit the organization. And I think that's what it's come down to, is having buy-in with our telework policies, having buy-in to the things that we're doing, that telework is a privilege. It's not an entitlement. Having the necessary performance metrics in place to manage and monitor people working remotely and to ensure that they're doing the right things, and having the necessary data-driven decision components in place to manage and ensure success. So all of that, I believe, represents the future of the workforce and the worker that we're trying to attract to come to San Joaquin County. Most of the newer workers and folks in the millennial area, they want to be more transitory in terms of how they do work. They want to manage around the clock. It doesn't necessarily mean working 8 to 5, but working after 5 o'clock. And so affording those flexibilities and what I call thinking outside the box and not worried with the customary backsides and seats is really going to get us to a better value in terms of long-term recruitment and retention, both here in San Joaquin, but I think in government as a whole, if we're able to do that. And that will make us more competitive in the future and allow us to continue to provide efficiencies and effectiveness to our constituents. So, and all in all, from what I've seen here, it's starting to work. And a year ago, we weren't even there. Like Tim said, we were trying to put our foot in the water about telework, and I was getting a lot of blowback from folks that that's just not the way the county does business. Well, we took advantage of the pandemic, and now the department heads and executive officers see the benefits, collateral benefits of working remotely, keeping the population down in the building, practicing social distance, and ensuring when we are here that people are effectively communicating in a safe way that prevents the spread of this disease. So all in all, I think they're seeing it as a model both now and into the future that will continue with us and reshape the way government does business.
Yeah, there's certain things that we're moving forward in leaps and bounds. And then there are other things that we are still sort of leading into. And that sounds like that's one for San Joaquin County to hire outside the region and to really just look at all of the possibilities. So not that your goal is to hire a workforce just from outside the region. Certainly that's not the case really for any government, but where necessary to expand that outreach.
We steal from each other all the time. So come on, let's call it.
Not to take it personally. So we have one question that came in from one of our attendees and actually leads into another question around budgeting that we have. So I'll ask that question to both Joel and Jan, especially since they have different operating models within their county. So the question that came in from Daniel Millay, apologies if I mispronounced Millay. So he said, IT provided its value as an enabler, mobilizer, agent of change during the pandemic. After many thanks and hoorays, the conversation now switches to tight budgets and undercompensated employees. So how do we change that narrative? So I want to broaden that out as I hand over to Joel to, if you could, address how you've leveraged licensing agreements and engaging existing or new vendors to support your technology needs, but also how that's going to continue on and change that narrative to the ongoing need.
Sure. So budgets are an interesting thing. And again, I look at it as an opportunity. For the longest time, we've all had the notion and the idea, and we've worked under the philosophy that technology can create efficiencies. Well, now we have an opportunity to prove it. And we can. Now in my county, with this hybrid model, and we have 20 email systems, and we have 10,000 firewall rules spread over dozens of firewalls, and we have duplicate equipment all over the place and duplicate licensing that does the same thing, sometimes from the same vendor at different pricing. So I think there needs to be a rationalization, and this is what I'm focused on, a rationalization of how we conduct our technology in our county. And some of the counties that are more centralized, you probably have done this already, but for those who are not, I think we need to I'm going to advocate more now and take advantage of COVID to demonstrate that value in consolidation of licenses for enterprise, that value of leveraging CISDA. We talked yesterday about Adobe and DocuSign for leveraging envelope costs, reducing the cost. Someone had $1.05, another person was paying $2.50. How does that happen? We need to leverage technology to support these, and we can demonstrate that now with COVID. We're going to rethink our equipment. We used to supply a laptop. We used to supply a desktop. I found some folks that had an iPad and a county phone and sometimes 2 laptops. What are we doing?
Sometimes people hoard with the fear that they'll never get that equipment in the future.
It's on you, and it's on us, I think, to show that value. Say, look, we can get you a laptop that can be mobile. The equipment will be mobile now. We'll be able to handle that capability, and we'll reduce that footprint way down. So we're actively engaged in a number of technology projects that are focused on cost reduction, circuit rationalization, renegotiating contracts with some of our providers to see if we can drive costs down. We're all doing that, but I think now is really the best time to leverage these capabilities and demonstrate that value. Just give you one example, and this is probably poor planning on my predecessors from years ago, and I want to thank them because we have a lot to reduce now. And it's not big, it just happens because of our federated model. We were able to take $12 million of circuit costs down by $2 million a year just by rethinking and redoing the contracts with a different provider. We had CenturyLink, we went to AT&T. I don't know if they're in the audience, but fact, we reduced the cost by $2 million. And I think we need to do more of that. So that's our program going forward, to rationalize how we do everything with licensing, equipment, all the onboarding that we do with technology, all the capabilities that we support, all the app development, enterprise, not agency, enterprise-wide. How do we figure that out? How do we leverage CRM? How do we leverage maintenance systems? How do we leverage the tools across the enterprise?
So I want to touch back on that in a moment around asset management and just really having a sense of what you have in your organization. I'll ping that question over to Chris in a minute, but first I want to hear from Jan, who does have a centralized model in his county. So are you seeing that it is a little bit easier for you to get your head around what you have and to deal with some of those things that Joel was speaking about?
Yeah, so what we do, since we because we are an internal service fund organization, any costs that we incur, that's going to go out to the department. And so, if I look at a specific example with COVID, we're planning for our next fiscal year's budget. And when the philosophy of the county kind of pre-COVID was, those that don't really need laptops should just have desktops. We don't want laptops sitting on desks, and people never take them home. But we kind of suffered for that when COVID hit, because then we had to buy all these laptops. And so now what we have is we're using CARES Act funding to purchase or pay for the purchase of those pieces of equipment. But now when you go look into the next year, now we have departments that have both, for each employee, both desktops and now laptops because of that. And what we're going to do, or what we've typically done in the past, however many PCs you have in your department, we're going to charge or allocate our next year's budget out for that. And it's not just the cost of the PC. It's we charge we allocate other costs per PC count, such as network connectivity or infrastructure that supports that desktop, licensing for that desktop, just desktop support services throughout the year. So that becomes a very and a big expense. So this year we're not going to we've done the initial purchase, but then going into the next year, we have to really understand how we're going to not charge extra for those extra PCs. So it's going to be working with the departments and saying, okay, more than likely you're going to want to keep your laptop, but then we're going to bring back those desktops so we don't have those, so we're not charging extra, we're not charging double per employee for equipment. So we look very carefully at that, but that's something that we have to grapple with. So we're not, so we keep the charges down for those departments.
So I'm going to lead that into a question around security. And I know, Chris, ahead of the pandemic, you had put quite a bit of effort in your organization to having a security posture, which included asset management and some other pieces. So I was wondering if you could share some of the ways that you were already prepared to sort of have a broad view of your organization, which in a lot of cases, I think is now, or at least potentially resulting in reduced license costs and really having a sense of what you have, which is, as Joel was saying, sometimes you don't even know how many pieces of equipment people have or the licenses that are assigned to them. So if you could speak about that.
Yeah, I think Joel brought up some great points. I felt like the amount of technology we had here was kind of like Baskin Robbins, right? 31 flavors, and you didn't know what they were. And each time we go buy a different flavor of ice cream and be charged for something that has similar functionality. And so obviously with asset management, when I was able to buy Tanium, it came with the asset management module because I really wanted to look at what are our technology investments across the enterprise. And given that we are a federated organization, to be quite frank, I found a lot of things that we were paying for that we weren't even utilizing, costly yearly maintenance fees that we were able to address. And so, I started working with each one of our federated managers to say, hey, let's, this is functionality we can take advantage of other current tools that we already have in place. Let's let these tools expire. Let's, redirect those dollars into more innovation and programmatic and county priorities that we need to be able to leverage. So we started having that dialogue in terms of how important that was to understand what your assets were. And having that listing of assets helped us make some really important decisions on how we look at technology investments moving forward. But that is also a key component of our security posture as well. We've been able to retire tools across our public health organization, across the sheriff's department, tools at our San Joaquin General Hospital that weren't on the centralized network before that are now on the network because we have these enterprise tools. And so I think that was really important that we made some decisions on how we wanted to look at strategic investments both now and into the future and really look at more of a centralized model for, as I call, standardization of the IT infrastructure and a common security posture. I wanted to get away from the word centralized because I always think that has very negative connotations in organizations that have been federated for a long time. Centralized to them looks like just a pure power play. But I wanted to do this by putting two heads together and looking at this as a partnership and developing governance on how we manage those capabilities. And the same thing we really did, Rebecca, for security tools as well. When we looked at threat protection and we looked at tools that work together from an integrated perspective, buying CrowdStrike, buying Tanium, looking at those tools and how they integrated with our security event management system. We started looking at it really an enterprise solution across our county and getting buy-in for those folks on how those tools are used. And today we're seeing the value of that at our sheriff's department, where we can stamp out potential issues that happen right away with CrowdStrike and other tools. But having it connected to a data dashboard gives my chief information security officer and our key managers visibility into what's going on and how we're managing threat detection moving forward and mitigating as well. So really having an enterprise level of tool sets and decreasing some of the tools you no longer need and evergreening those tools, I think is really important to the county because that helps us fund new innovation and transformation in technology. And so I think making those types of technology decisions is helping us be more effective and also setting us up for the future and how we look at our technology infrastructure moving forward. how we look at managing firewalls, how we look at doing asset management from an enterprise console rather than from a machine-related idea. Because now we can do all of these things remotely in a virtual environment. And I think that's where the county is going. I know the state of California is going there. I think counties will soon to follow, and that the virtual worker will be here to stay both short-term and into the long-term future. So now is the preparatory planning that we need to do in terms of documenting that and setting ourselves up for success. But it's about working together and developing these partnerships with my peers in the organization, folks, to convince them that we don't need one of every technology. We need prudent technologies that integrate and work together, that draw down our ROI and result in efficiencies in our organization and how we manage our infrastructure. So I think that's working really well here, but having asset management in place has been really key in helping make decisions on ongoing technology and whether or not we should continue to enable that technology, or the tools that we already have provide similar functionality. It helps us, I think, prioritize and make those strategic investments and make the evergreening process, as I mentioned, much more efficient moving forward.
Yeah.
So I think it's put us in the right posture.
Yeah, so to be able to support and back up those requests for additional funding or different funding as well. I'm going to go over to, we have about just under 10 minutes left in our session. And so I want to go over to some of the questions that we have coming in from our attendees, which will also give me the opportunity to launch our third poll. So Dave Cohn had asked, after rapidly moving to mainly remote work, we now see the situation continuing for some time. What are some of the biggest challenges this group sees as they look into the future, and how can they address these challenges? I'd like to ask that question to Tim first. And also, if you could, Tim, address your wish list item. So if there's one thing, one single technology solution or process you're most excited about, one transformation that you would implement in your county, we'd love to hear about that. When, kind of putting aside any budget constraints or anything like that, just your sort of dream. And I'll launch our last poll to see how that matches up with some of our attendees' thoughts. And that question is, my county still needs enhancements in the following to support our distributed workforce. And you can answer this more broadly if you like. So I'll launch that poll, and you can go ahead and share with us your wish list and just generally what you're seeing long term.
Let's say long term. Let's talk about that first. So what are we into this? 6, 7, 8 months? It's been a while, and we've gone through a lot of digital transformation. I had seen one stat that said for every month that we are under this pandemic, we're seeing a year's worth of digital transformation, and it's very interesting to see not only our workforce but our customers adapting to technology, and to the point where it's a tool in the background. They're just using it naturally. So the use of virtual tools, we've seen that explode. When I took a look at our stats for Teams for virtual calls, back in February, we had 600 virtual calls. Here in September, we had 55,000 virtual calls. So I mean, it's the adoption of the technology is extraordinary. And we're seeing tactical work getting done, perhaps even at a more efficient, in a more efficient manner. But now that we've been in it for a while, I think what we're seeing suffering potentially is some of that creativity and collaboration that we had when we were together. And so as we're looking to the future, it's how do we strike that balance of getting a very efficient way of getting our work done, using these tools effectively to get our work done and deliver services to our customers and our community, but then not lose that creativity, collaboration, and just the bonding that came with being together within our workplaces. So that I think is what we're going to have to focus on just from a people standpoint for the next several months is, are we losing something now that we're continuing to be apart? What's happening to our culture that we created when we were in person? Are we able to sustain it as we continue in this more virtual environment? So that's something I'm concerned with as we're looking forward and managing our workforce. I know a lot of people talk about virtual meeting burnout and Zoom fatigue, or whatever you want to brand it, but I think there's a bigger piece of it around our people and our staff, which is our most important resource in technology, making sure that they continue to grow in their careers, learn from the experiences of others, and how do you establish that? Can you do it virtually? So if you're asking me what investment we can make, well, I'm looking at your list here.
Money or budget aside, so whatever.
Money or budget aside,
you.
gosh. And as you were talking about
I
this,
just closed the poll, so you can see there.
Can I choose more than one? Gee.
You could have chosen more than one, and we had someone actually chat in that they wanted a question for an option for none of the above, which I think is great news. You're not needing to select any of those, so that's awesome to hear.
But as I was thinking this through as you were talking, I'm reminded that before the pandemic, one of our biggest concerns was all the ransomware that had shifted to hitting all of local government. I mean, it just seemed like every week some local government was dramatically getting hit by ransomware, and in fact, very close to home here. And now we focused our attention on a virtual workplace, but that security hasn't gone away. So, I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't say absolutely continue to invest in security. I want an absolutely secure environment so that people can work everywhere. We can deliver the services. We can protect the data. If there's one area that constantly scares me, it's the area of security and data loss and so on. So, I mean, that would be a top priority. And then in terms of communication, I think this situation has just shown the need to have a more modern communication tool. If it means moving away from the traditional desk phone to a soft phone environment, and just kind of changing that whole paradigm of picking up a phone and dialing somebody up. That has shifted completely. Our soft phone deployments during this time, it was amazing. We instantly deployed 500 to 600 soft phones out, and people don't want to give them up anymore. So just the change in the way that people want to communicate. I think the communication tools, the more they can advance, I don't think that we've seen the stop in the evolution of the communication tools, whether that's Teams or Zoom or the collaboration tools that people are using. I'm really excited about what we're going to see in the next few months as these tools mature.
And we have just enough time for Joel, if you could answer the same question. What is this sort of single wish list item, if you could have anything without budget as a concern? Oh, I think you're on mute. You were being too polite.
I'm sorry. Can you ask me on that question? No. Mine is simply 4 words: centralize, network, and security. It's because of the unique situation I'm in. And to me, that wish list comes with a broad set of follow-ups, efficiencies, safety that go along with it. And I think that will greatly change our county. And, I equate it all the time, and now I'm convinced more than ever. I equate it all the time. To an analogy, if you were building a building, a new home, would you think about putting indoor plumbing in? It's a given. You're going to have indoor plumbing. Well, IT, it should be a given that the pieces that belong together are together. And I'm advocating for that to the point where I'm raising it to our legislative group in our organization. I'm raising it to our CEO. I'm constantly beating the board with it. I may get beaten back. That's okay. But I truly believe in my heart that it's 4 simple words. It's centralized, network, and security, because to me, that is the source of security evil. It's the source of cost overrun evil. It's the source of extra workforce, which we don't have, evil. And I think that we can fix many things if we just focus on that. That would be my wish list. And it doesn't have a budget consequence or a resource issue. It's easy to do. It's policy. I think
And it has a much better ring. It has a much better ring to it than IT, the indoor plumbing of your organization. So I like your version a lot better.
Yeah, I don't know
So,
yeah.
well, on that note, that brings us to the end of our time. I want to thank Chris, Tim, Jan, and Joel for being with us today. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining us in this session. Our goal was for you to leave this session with some ideas and inspiration to make sure your organization is prepared and resilient, and I hope we met that goal. Thank you again to CISDA and the event sponsors. So be well, be safe, wear a mask. Remember to complete the 2020 census today and vote. So thank you all for your time, and we'll see you at the next event.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Rebecca.
Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate
Bye.
it, everybody. Thank you.